Good afternoon. My name is Councillor Vicky Slade. I'm leader of BCP Council. I am live now for the next 30 minutes on our regular Q&A that takes place on a Wednesday lunchtime. Just wanting to make sure we're live. Yes, I think we are. Yes. So we've moved this to a fortnightly session now that we're in more of a business as usual situation, which means that obviously it's much easier for us to give you ideas of what's going on outside of the COVID situation. So I'd be very happy to encourage any questions that people might have in terms of non-COVID questions as well as those related to COVID. I've got one thumbs up, which means that it is working. A couple of weeks ago I wasn't seeing any questions, so I have no questions at the moment. So who wants to start with asking me a question? Nothing coming through, so can somebody just post something in the questions just so that I know that we are live and we don't have a problem, please? Somebody, can you hear me? Okay, could somebody from comms just put a comment in so that I can see whether there are comments coming in or whether I'm going to have to use my mobile phone? There's no point me talking to myself. Okay, thank you very much. I've got some questions coming in. Park and ride. The question is park and ride. Why don't we have a park and ride, presumably? Park and ride works especially well in areas that have year-round tourism. We did have a beach park and ride in Poole a number of years ago. It was actually a complete disaster. Reason being that unless you can guarantee hot weather, the costs you have in setting up the bus companies to give you access to buses and staff every weekend over the whole summer takes buses out of sync and costs a lot of money. So realistically, a permanent year-round park and ride is what we need to look at, but that needs to be looking at where it should be to service the year-round needs. So various options have been looked at. We've got the space in Poole for one. There hasn't been a space identified in Bournemouth recently. We are doing a strategic parking review which will look at car parks going forward. It may well be an answer, but I don't necessarily think it's necessarily the answer, because as we've seen, people want to get as close to the beach as they can and they're prepared to pay for the privilege. So if you've got suitcases, buckets and spades and picnics and all the rest of it, how likely are you to want to park on the outskirts of town and wait for a bus in? There are some options around potentially parking in Boscombe or parking in Poole Town and then actually getting the bus to the beach. There's nothing to stop people from doing that, and you're likely to get there a lot quicker. So, there is that to think about. Barbara's asked what the plans are for the virtual air festival. Thank you very much for reminding everybody. We have that not this weekend, the following weekend, the 21st to the 23rd of August, where we will be reviewing some of the best bits from not only our air show but other air shows, interviews with the Red Arrows pilots, and talks with some of the other stars of the past. So if you are a fan of the air show, there won't be any flying going on, obviously, but we do want to make sure that we recognise that the air festival has a place in the hearts of people in Bournemouth, and give people the opportunity to catch up on some sites they may never have seen before. For example, things like the fact that ours was the first dusk flying. That's now been picked up by other places in the country. So we have done some innovative things. In terms of next year's air festival, that has now been moved to the first weekend of September. That's a deliberate move, because one of the arguments that has been made for the air festival over the years is that it draws people into town. And actually, those people who don't like the air festival will say, hang on a minute, look what it's like on weekends where we don't have an air festival, it's rammed. We don't need the air festival in the middle of the summer to draw people here because we're already busy. And that argument, I completely accept. So the idea originally was to extend the summer season. So what I did when we agreed to take next year's air festival was to actually ask for it to be moved to the first weekend of September, when some of the schools will be back, and therefore it's an opportunity for us to genuinely extend our summer season and make a better economic argument for the Air Festival. We're also going to be increasing the environmental impact issues. So last year we offset the carbon from the flying. We're looking to do more than that next year. We're looking to involve the sea more. We're also looking to involve local businesses more, so that it's not just about businesses that are related to the military, but also businesses that are related to marine and aerospace engineering locally. So there's a lot of work that's being done on that, and a lot of work that's being done with other types of transport in the sea, yacht clubs, looking at whether we can work with Sunseeker, whether we can have any other attractions. So lots going on there. Okay, what's happening about the shack at Muscliffe? So Angela's raised the problem that there is a children's services building in Muscliffe where a service was set up for a company, an organisation to work with children who weren't in school, to give them support and training around becoming involved in hospitality. That project unfortunately didn't work, and it was a fixed term that the shack could be used as a community cafe where these young people would be trained in hospitality to actually look to improve their employability and their job skills. Because that scheme was unsuccessful, it closed, but there was an agreement that for the rest of the licence period, the community, that somebody came forward and said that they would like to continue to run it as a community cafe, which they have done. That licence period has, I understand, now finished, and that was a fixed term opportunity. And the children's services team need that facility because we have a lot of children who have been excluded from schools and are currently travelling from places in Bournemouth and in Poole across to a service in Christchurch, which can't manage the needs of all of the children in the same place. So we need to actually be looking at what facilities the council owns and that is run by children's services for the most vulnerable children in our community who need to have an alternative provision other than going to a mainstream school, either because they've been excluded from a mainstream school or because they have particular needs that means they can't manage in a mainstream school. Sometimes that's because of medical reasons, emotional reasons, or mental health problems. And this facility was designed for that. So we know that the community and the lady that's been running the community cafe are very upset about this operational decision. It's absolutely not a political decision. It was within the contract came to an end, and the officers did what they felt was right for the people that they're looking after, i.e. the most vulnerable children. We've now been made aware of this. Local ward members were not aware of it at the time. I was not aware of it because it was deemed to be an operational issue. Now that we are, we're looking at how we can facilitate those children getting what they need and the community still having access to a community cafe, either through a use of using the space differently or through whether there's another facility within the Muscliffe area that can be used. Clearly, the timing is difficult because there's only a couple of weeks till the schools go back, but the ward councillor and the portfolio holder are on top of this, and I'm sure that if you speak to them, you'll be able to get a fuller update. So, first question about camping on the beach. Let's go through what the actual rules are around camping on the beach. We have bylaws that stop people from camping on the beach. However, the way that the bylaw actually operates is that if somebody is camping, we can approach them and ask them to remove themselves. If they don't remove themselves, we can serve them with an eviction notice. We can actually serve them with a prosecution. That prosecution doesn't actually force them to move on. What it does is it requires them to provide their name and address so that we can then take them to court for camping on the beach. However, the only people who can be required to give their name and address to is our CSAS officers and a police officer. So what we've got is a situation where people can abuse the situation and where it's actually quite difficult without the support of the police, who quite understandably have a lot of other issues that they have to deal with, unless they're able to be with us, it's quite difficult to enforce the evictions. It is good to say that we did manage to remove 100 campers from the beach on Saturday night. We served 35 formal eviction notices, and that we have moved even more staff who are working literally through the night. Security officers working through the night, and beach patrols working late until the evening and from early in the morning to dissuade people from camping on the beach and removing them and disrupting them. It's worth bearing in mind that our tractors start at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning in cleaning the beaches. That is a problem for us, that it puts them in a difficult position when people decide to camp, and it means it's not actually a peaceful experience for people who are choosing to camp, because they are going to be disrupted. So we're doing all we can with the messaging to stop that, and we are looking at other ways where we can legally move people on quickly. But you will have seen similar encampments at Chesil Beach, down in Dorset, at Durdle Door, on Weymouth Beach, on Brighton Beach, that this is not something that's exclusive to BCP. It is not something that is easy to deal with, because actually you cannot physically drag somebody off of the beach. If somebody does not wish to leave the beach, we have to call the police, and the police will base their attendance at events on what they see as risk to life or property. So that is how the police monitor. If you phone 101 and say this is going on, they will assess their calls based upon the risk and the harm. So I was completely misquoted earlier this week in suggesting that there was no harm. My reference was regarding the level of harm which the police see from the activity of a tent on the beach. It has harm to our community, it has harm to our environment in terms of people defecating on the beach, people camping, having fires on the beach, and people disturbing the community. But in terms of, is somebody's life at risk or property at risk, and therefore if you call 999 when the police come, understandably the police are going to prioritise other issues where people are actually going to come to direct harm. So that is where we have to work with the police. This was discussed at our tactical group yesterday, which we work on with police and other agencies, and tomorrow it's being escalated up to the strategic group, because we are very concerned that our ability to be able to deal with is being limited by the legal powers that we have. We are looking at other alternatives in relation to the legal powers. Okay, so in terms of, so I'm going to try and go through some of these, and I'll come back to some other issues shortly. What's going on with the Poole Stadium? It belongs to people of Poole. So the Poole Stadium is currently on a lease to the current organisation, Stadia UK. That lease runs for a considerable period of time. That stadium has not reopened, and it is probably for them to decide and tell us, when they're going to reopen that facility. However, if you look at the local plan for Poole that was established in 2019, just before we formed as BCP Council, you will be aware that the area around the stadium is within the local plan for redevelopment. That redevelopment does include a stadium. But it also includes housing, retail, and other facilities. But as with all planning processes, it is for developers to come forward with their ideas. So there is nothing to stop you or me from putting forward a planning application on a piece of land that we either own or don't own, but we've got an idea for. And ultimately, we are in that position where yes, a stadium is supposed to go on that site, but it is possible that if the developer said, well, actually, we can actually do something different with the site, but we'll provide you with a stadium. It's a bit like in my ward, we've got some tennis courts where people have said they're not in the great place for tennis courts necessarily because they're quite shaded, and the rule is, if somebody decided to build on those tennis courts, they'd have to provide other tennis courts within the community to make sure that was mitigated. So the local plan requires there to be a stadium, and it should be staying on that site But in the event that a development opportunity came up and someone said to us, we can build you a great stadium and we can develop this site, then that would be for the planning department to decide if that was appropriate. So yes, we want to keep the stadium. There are no current plans. I'm not aware there's a planning application in at the moment, but anybody is allowed to put in a planning application at any time. Why can't we tow every car parked on the path when it's hot? Well, Paul, so we can tow any car that is obstructing the highway or obstructing the pavement. If a car is parked completely on a pavement and it is blocking the ability of people to pass, then we can remove it in the same way as we can remove it if it is blocking the road, causing an obstruction or causing a danger. However, we cannot remove a vehicle if it is not dangerous or obstructing. So if it's partly on the pavement or if it's fully on the pavement but the pavement is wide enough for somebody to get past it, then we legally cannot tow it away. So at the end of the day, it is about the judgment of our our senior parking officers who have to decide whether it meets the legislation. Because if we tow away a vehicle that is not deemed to be dangerous or causing a direct obstruction, then we actually would be breaching. So there are very strict rules about who we can tow away. We can't tow away everybody who is parked on a double yellow line. That does not meet the threshold. We wouldn't have the capacity to do it anyway, but we are ticketing very large number of people who are on double yellow lines, and I believe, I can't give you the numbers for how many cars have been towed away, but it is dozens each weekend. Is that we have 2 vehicles that can do it, and they're pretty much busy all day, starting in the morning right the way through the day. A tow away is authorised, they come and tow, they move it away, and then they go to the next one. So that is the capacity. Someone who drives and cycles, can you congratulate the council? Oh, it's moving so fast. Have travellers got a place for themselves? Can we enforce it? Sarah, no, actually they don't. There's a real confusion around travellers. I don't want to go into it for too long because we have talked about this several times before. Travellers who have settled here but choose to live in a traveller site, so what we would describe as a settled traveller community, we are required to have a site, and we do have a site. That site is at Mannings Heath. That is well looked after, it's well managed. Years ago there were some incidents, they are in the past, and they are a settled, meaningful, contributing members of the community whose children go to school and whose people have jobs, and they're great and they're part of who we are, and they have the vote, and we have, we welcome them in our community. However, there is also a right for people who are from a traveller, gypsy and Romany background to travel. And those people move around the country for all or part of the year. And as a local authority, we should have a site for them to stay at. It's called either a transit site or a temporary stopping place. Every local authority should have one. If they do not have one, they're not required to have one, but if they do not have one, and we do not have one, then we cannot move people from another place to a temporary stopping place because we don't have one. The police also can't use Section 62 powers, which requires somebody to immediately move on to the temporary travelling place because we don't have one. They could use their discretionary Section 61 powers, but the threshold for harm, there has to be evidence of crime and activity caused directly by those individuals in that space, or something like parked next to a school where it's having direct impact, for the police to use those powers. It's very rare for them to use those powers because their view is, quite understandably, that if we have not actually done our side of the bargain by having a travelling site for people to go to, then just because people don't want them in Red Hill Park or at Beach Road Car Park or wherever else, that we can't make them move on because we have not provided a site. If and when we provide a site, then those powers will be able to be used instantly and people will be moved on immediately. But without those powers, the council as the landowner cannot invoke Section 61. They can invoke a court order, and they regularly do invoke a court order. Paul Park Travellers had a court order, Redhill had a court order, but very often what happens is that people will move on before the court order's date, because they know that the court will say, move on, you're causing a disruption. So we are in a difficult situation because we're not doing our side of the bargain. We have to comply with the law ourselves. There is a consultation that we've submitted to, as most councils have, with government. It is due to go through Parliament, to be discussed in Parliament during the next parliamentary year. It starts in September, runs through to next July. We have no idea what that piece of legislation might look like. That is for your MPs really to comment on. Why are we allowing so many people on the beach? Okay, well, that's a very simple question. We're allowing people on the beach because it's not hard to disallow people from the beach. There is absolutely no evidence that lots of people on our beaches has led to a spike in local cases. You'll be aware we're still one of the areas with the lowest number of COVID cases in the country. If the people on the beaches were bringing COVID with them, our staff who are working on the beaches would probably be contracting the virus. They're not. It's not our place to restrict the number of people allowed on the beach. It's a public place. It's not a private space. It's not our space. And I find it quite offensive when I hear people saying, stop those people coming here using our beaches. We're lucky to live here. Ultimately, if people choose to travel, which they're allowed to do, and they choose to drive down here to a public space, and they pay to park in a public car park, or they catch the bus or the train and they walk to the beach, it's not our beach, it's a public beach. We don't have private beaches in this country, and apart from places like Durdle Door, which is private, they therefore have the right to close the beach if they wish to, because they own the land. It's public land, it will remain public land, and there's really no issue around stopping people going to the beach. If you don't like lots of people on the beach, then the whole purpose of the beach app is that you find a quieter beach. I can recommend you lots of other beaches you might want to go to that are in BP or beyond if you want a quiet beach. But ultimately, it's not our job to stop people coming to the beach. Actually, if people stop coming to the beach, your council services won't be happening, because we rely heavily on those tourists to actually provide an income for the council. 12% of people, that's more than 1 in 10 people, are directly employed by the tourism industry. Another 10% or so are involved with the hospitality industry, and we'd be a very overweight population if our hospitality industry was being completely supplied by the local residents. We need tourists. That's what we are. We're a tourist town. That's why lots of us chose to live here, because it's beautiful. We have no right to turn other people away, and there is nothing to suggest that this area makes people more likely to contract COVID. If you can't social distance, that is your own personal responsibility to move to somewhere where you can. It's not the council's responsibility to make sure you have a ring around you. Okay, so drugs and addicts unfortunately housed in many HMOs. It seems to go hand in hand with permissions granted for HMOs. We're really, really worried, if I'm honest, about the new planning laws that are coming in that are going to take a lot of powers away from councils and allow developers to build what the heck they like without the protections that we have from the current planning system. So I will just caveat what I say by careful what we wish for. In terms of drug use, we can't actually dictate whether someone is a drug user or not in terms of whether they're allowed in a property. The owner of a property has a responsibility to manage it to a certain standard. And when you have a HMO licence, you are required to maintain public order. And our teams will work with their landlords to maintain public order. You'll know that we've got a consultation out at the moment around selective licensing. That selective licensing will allow us to actually have a licensed list of everyone who is a landlord in areas where particularly there are things like HMOs, to make sure that the properties are being well managed, and the people who are living in them have reasonable living standards, because frankly the disgusting state some of these properties are in, you wouldn't put your worst enemy in. So I think we have to respect the fact that if you put somebody in a really disgraceful conditions, they're hardly likely to find themselves wanting to turn their lives around. We also have to remember that people who are drug users are very often struggling with things, and we need to make sure the support is there. And that's where our homeless approach is working really, really well. We have had a situation in the last few months where we've had to house a lot of people very quickly, and that has meant having to put people in where there is availability of rooms at a low cost, because obviously we don't want to make sure that the council's cost from housing those people is very, very high. We have moved a significant number of those individuals on. Over 75 people who were temporarily housed have been moved on, and there are plans in place for the others. In terms of drug abuse, you have to report drug dealing and things like that to the police. That is not a council matter. You know, our antisocial behaviour officers will intervene where they can, but crimes should be reported to the police. There is a real problem, and I find it in my own community and we find it elsewhere, that people choose not to report things to the police because they don't think the police are going to come. Then you end up with a situation where we talk to the police and say, we've got a problem because you never come to this area. And they say, well, there's no record of crime. There's no record of antisocial behaviour because people aren't reporting. And I get that when you phone up and people, why do we always do this anyway? Because nobody holds a phone like that, do they? When you phone up the police and they don't come, then it's pretty demoralising. So what I would suggest that you do, if you have incidents of drug dealing, antisocial behaviour, any sort of crimes, please report it. And if you don't want to sit hanging on one and one, and it can be a pain, go on their website, go on the Dorset Police website and report it. It says it takes 20 minutes. It's never taken me more than 7 or 8 minutes to report a crime or an incident on there. It will ask you for who the victim is. If you don't know the victim, it doesn't let you move on. That's a pain, and I'm going to report that to them. But just put something in the box. You need to report. If you report, then they can't ignore. And actually, the police need to know what the true state of crime and antisocial behaviour is, so they can allocate resources more fairly. You know, they cannot know what you don't tell them. And that is true also when we see things happen, we need to be reporting them too. What are we doing to give single mums with kids better housing? Kids shouldn't be in flats with no gardens. I don't think we should be saying that flats are necessarily no good for people with children. There are millions of people who live in flats that don't have a garden, and they bring their children up beautifully, and their children do very well. We simply cannot build houses with gardens for everybody. It's just not going to happen. If we have to build 10,000 houses and every one of them has got to have a garden and a picket fence around it, or even if we only have to build 6,000 of them because the rest of them, are single people, we would pave over everything. There are going to have to be people that live in flats. When people are being housed by the council, we house according to absolute need. Our job as the council is not to give everyone a house. It's to give people who have no other means of obtaining housing a last chance option. It isn't to provide for everybody. So we have a limited stock of housing where people are overcrowded. So that is, they have more people than their bedrooms. So you have a 2-bedroom property that has got 5 people in it, because it should have up to 4 people in it, unless those 3 additional people are all children of the same sex under 10. If you've got a lot of people in a small property, you're going to be banded at a higher level. So you might be a gold banding rather than a silver banding. We'll move those people through as quickly as we can with new housing. But on the flip side, we've got people who are rejecting every time we look in to put in a planning application. If we put in planning applications and then people say we don't want them round here and we can't build the houses, then it'll take longer. But everybody on the Dorset Home Choice is assessed via a housing allocations policy. Everybody on Dorset Home Choice has the opportunity to bid for properties that are available, and if they're in the right housing band, they'll be given housing much quicker. But we have, I think it was 350 families, was it more than that? At least hundreds and hundreds of families who need a 4-bedroom property. We've just applied to build 14, and the problems we got from people complaining about that, there's 14 families that will have a home. And hopefully more people who are living in a bigger property will decide to actually move to a smaller property as we build newer properties. they feel are better. So I don't think we should be saying flats are necessarily bad. Teenagers jumping from the river in Bourne, witness crossing the bridge on 30 to the other side. Can a safety net be put up? Lawrence, I suggest you go to the police on that one. I don't think a safety net can be put up. No, I mean, that could cause even more danger. I mean, ultimately, if you jump off the bridge into open water and you can swim away. If you jump off the bridge and you can swim and you get trapped in a safety net, I mean, you could drown. So I think that's a real worry. I don't think I'd be comfortable with that. We need to actually try and stop people from jumping in the river. I'm missing a lot of this stuff. Are about to run out of time. Somebody said COVID scam. Tell that to the people I know who died. Sorry, I don't feel that way. Yes, it is official. We are in a recession, Sam. It's potentially one of the worst recessions we're going to have for a long time, which is why we do need to support our local businesses, including our tourism businesses and our hospitality businesses. So trying to discourage tourists from this area when those people are providing jobs for us is a really, really damaging thing to do. We need to get people back into work and spend money as best we can in the local area. Which reminds me, it is Shop Local Week, so please shop local. We've also got the Eat Out to help out. But can I just make a little plea? And this is on behalf of the wonderful people who work in hospitality. If you have saved £10 per head on your meal, so in some cases that might mean that a group eating out might have saved £70, £80, £90 on their meal, please leave a tip. Because I've heard cases of youngsters who are on minimum wage, working in this horrendous heat, being given pretty crappy, responses from customers demanding that, they want their food now. When these staff are working in really difficult situations, having to social distance, kitchens are having to be reformatted, businesses are having to spend a lot of money to make it safe for people. And then somebody that spent £150 leaves a £2 tip. And you're like, come on, guys. You've saved a fortune. Be fair to the staff. The same if you're giving your hairdresser, the hairdressers, yes, some of them are having to charge a bit more, but they're working in pretty tricky situations. They're putting themselves at risk. So please do remember that, hospitality and public, customer services would really like to have the tips that people have always given. They need them just as much as ever. And if they've been furloughed and they're used to having an income that has an element of tipping, then during the time they've been furloughed, they've been on 80% of their basic. So they've probably been doing worse off than a lot of other people. Okay, it's 25 I've got another meeting coming up shortly. Lee, are all the toilets open for beachgoers? Yes, they are. Our toilets are open from 7 in the morning until 10 at night generally. Some of the quieter areas close at 7. If the toilets are closed when you go by, it'll be because they're being cleaned. They are typically cleaned at least 3 occasions a day. We're doing everything we can to keep them as hygienic as we possibly can. Our park toilets are generally open. If toilets are closed, it's probably because there's been vandalism or mechanical failure. We had toilets closed at Cafe Riva because 3 of the hand washing units had failed, and obviously we can't allow people to go in there if they can't actually hygienically wash their hands. So that is a factor. So please, bear that in mind. There is no excuse for people urinating or defecating where they shouldn't because our toilets are open. And if people camp on the beach, it's not our ability to keep the toilets open at 3 in the morning so that they can go and have a wee. They shouldn't be on the beach in the first place. And our staff shouldn't have to deal with it the next day. So just a quick final word to all of those people who are due to receive their A-level results on Thursday. Good luck. It's been horrible for you. I get that. The same is true for GCSEs next week. I'm not quite sure when this call is going to be because of holidays and things. But A-level results this week, GCSE results, BTEC results over the next week or so. I know it's been really tough for the kids. It's been really tough for the parents. It's been really tough for the teachers, governors, and I'm sending out a big hug to all of you because it is horrible what you've had to go through. And even though some of you are now going to be allowed to use your mock results rather than your predicted results, that's going to be disappointing for those of you who were using your mocks as a stepping stone to where you were going to be in June. So I really hope everybody gets where they need to be. Our service called Ansbury is available for you if you need it. Clearing will be busy on Thursday for those people who decide they actually did want to go to uni, or they perhaps haven't got the results they want. Please don't give up. You know, you can make a good life for yourself if things go wrong at certain periods of time. You know, it is a moment in time, but I keep my fingers crossed for all of you. And I will just remind you, if you have got smallish issues to do with potholes, I know it's a big issue for you if it's in your street, but if you've got potholes, street lights, bins not emptied, you know, fly tipping, please use the website to report it. It gets it straight into our work streams. The staff are able to pick things up on their routes. If you send an email to comms department and then they have to send an email, it's actually a lot quicker if you just go on the report it zone. If the report it doesn't work and you aren't getting a response back, escalate it to your ward counsellor. Your ward counsellor's there for you. They've all got contact details on the website. That is their job, to represent your local ward issues. They should be the ones that are actually picking up problems that are occurring in your area. So I'm going to call it a day at that note. Lovely to see you all again. Please don't remember, drink lots, don't leave dogs and children and sick people in hot cars, because it's really, really dangerous. Make sure you keep hydrated and keep going with the sun cream.